Okay, so everyone should now see my screen. And if I could just get a thumbs up in the chat that you can in fact see the opening slide, Sunday Business Sermons with Jane Friedman, and then we'll get started. Wonderful. Thank you, David. Thank you, Wendy. Okay, so I have a very unique basis for my public speaking career, such as it is. I speak currently during normal times, not during COVID times. During normal times, I speak at maybe a dozen events per year. Some of those are events close to home. Some of those are very far away. For some of those events, I get paid. Others I don't. So it's a really diverse mix of public speaking that I do. But all of the speaking I do has its roots in my career at Writer's Digest, where I became an editor in 2001. And one of the unique qualities of Writer's Digest is that not only does it have, a really significant footprint as far as, writing and the writing and publishing community, it also can advertise its editors as speakers at writing conferences. So here on this slide, you can see I took a picture of a recent issue. It's the September-October issue where they have a house ad saying, hey, if you run a writing conference, you can reach out and have one of our folks speak at your event. Now, this same ad has been running for basically 20 years. It's used to fill space and it runs in most issues. And so this is how I started speaking. The editor at the time would basically assign out to the editors, those who were interested, different speaking engagements based on their expertise, their comfort level, where they wanted to go, and so forth. And so the very first speaking engagement that I was assigned was the Infinity Publishing Conference in Pennsylvania. This was a self-publishing service company. And the reason I was sent to speak there was because I was on the self-publishing beat at Writer's Digest, writing and reporting on the self-publishing industry and what was a very growing part of writing and publishing in the early 2000s because of the advent of print on demand. So when I got that first speaking engagement gig, I had to get a headshot. And so our corporate parent, F&W Media, had a photo studio on the premises. I walked probably not more than a couple hundred feet outside of my cubicle to the photo studio, got my first headshot, which you see here. And then I went and spoke at the conference. And that was the first of hundreds of events that I then spoke at as a representative of Writer's Digest. Now, the reason I'm starting off with this is because Writer's Digest had a policy. I don't know if that policy is still in place or not, because the company is under different ownership now. But the policy was that if you're going to speak at an event as a Writer's Digest representative, then you're not going to get paid. Like, you're going to do it as a marketing activity for Writer's Digest. You will still be paid as a salaried employee for any time you spend. And then if you're working on a weekend at this conference, you get paid time off once you come back to the office, or maybe you take it before you leave for the conference. So it was considered part of your job to go and do these events. And it was considered by the editor at the time a conflict of interest for the conferences to pay for Writer's Digest speakers. So I never had to worry about what I should be paid, what other people were getting. It was all part of the job. And so I happily accepted any gigs, any invitations where I had something to offer. Now, in 2010, I left Writer's Digest, and that was after 9 years of speaking through them. But of course, I kept getting invitations. In fact, on some level, the invitations increased because I had started blogging, and so the blog made me more visible. I didn't have to rely on people seeing an advertisement in the magazine. I was also active on Twitter. I was tweeting all sorts of information about book publishing. I was on Facebook. So you get the idea. There were lots of ways to be noticed and be visible in 2010 as compared to 2001. But it did lead to this moment of reckoning for me and my public speaking career, which was I had no idea what I was worth. I didn't know what I should charge. Some part of me was still just assuming I would go and speak for free and benefit from these events from a marketing perspective, which of course is not exactly a sustainable model. And so it was around 2010 or 2011 um, when it got so bad. It was like another colleague at Writer's Digest was turning down speaking engagements, referring those people to me, knowing that they didn't pay, but assuming that I would probably agree to speak. And then I found myself like traveling for 6 hours on my own dime, speaking, or I would, invest 2 or 3 days of preparation into a presentation to a very small group, and not be compensated at all. So, kind of the final straw for me was presenting, and I actually have photo evidence of this, of me presenting in like a church cafeteria to a very small group of about 25 people. I just drove there. It was like a 3-hour drive. I gave a talk for about 40 minutes, and then I turned around and drove back home. And I realized this is not right. I need to change what I'm doing here. And I know that many authors find themselves kind of in similar difficult positions where you need exposure. You're looking for visibility. You want opportunities to sell books or to market yourself. But how far do you go in making these offers, with no compensation for yourself? The same would apply to school visits, to some extent, maybe book club visits, and so on. So I started changing the model. Now, something else happened at about the same time, which was very fortuitous. Um, this was around let's see. So I left Writer's Digest in 2010, and it was, I think, around 2011 that I ended up putting out a free ebook. It was called The Future of Publishing. And the reason I put this out, it's just a self-published, it's almost like a manifesto. It's not really a book. I put it out in PDF version only. And the reason I did it is because the most consistent question I got when I was speaking or writing my blog or on social media, the big question on everyone's mind was, what's the future of publishing? So this was very early in the digital publishing ebook evolution. People thought maybe traditional publishers would die, that self-publishing would take over. And so there was a lot of existential angst on the part of both publishers and authors about what the future held. It's also a very optimistic time. So people felt like, there was some incredible innovations that were going to lead to better things for everyone, especially authors. Now that I didn't intend to put that out as a marketing piece, but that's what it ended up doing in a really big way for my public speaking. Literally, I had kind of the only book out there, or in this case, like a pamphlet, more or less, the manifesto, the only book out there called The Future of Publishing. And so whenever people Googled Future of Publishing, they were likely to come up with this ebook around 2011. And they saw my name and they read my blog and they saw my social media presence and they thought, hey, this person might be a good speaker at our conference. So if I had just done the ebook by itself and I didn't have a social media following, I didn't have a blog, I didn't have a website, I don't know that I would have gotten any speaking invites. But when all of that came together under one umbrella, I looked very credible. Obviously, I had the history at Writer's Digest also behind me. And so all this to say that I attracted speaking engagements because of the quality of the work I was producing. So if you're at a stage where no one's approaching you, it may be that you simply don't have enough work out on the market. You're not very visible. You need to have some work circulating. You need to have published work typically out there, or some body of work, whether it's a blog, a podcast, a YouTube channel, a newsletter, something that gets people talking and that also associates you with the topic that you want to speak on. So this is true for either free or paid speaking engagements. So 2 engagements I got from this that were really remarkable and that I can just chalk up to serendipity because people looked for Future of Publishing and found me, was an event in Berlin, Germany, called LitFlow. They were convening a one-day think tank on the future of publishing, and I ended up being one of, I think, 7 or 8 people to attend that. It's incredible. Like, it was a full expenses paid trip to Berlin, Germany, and also an honorarium. I think it was maybe $1,000 or marks or euro or whatever it was they paid me in. And then I also was invited again to a German event. This was at Frankfurt Book Fair. Arizona State was organizing another very similar kind of think tank, let's write a book in a day on the floor of Frankfurt Book Fair on the future of publishing. And so they found me, and along with 4 or 5 other people, I sat at a table for 3 days at Frankfurt Book Fair and wrote about the future of publishing on the spot. Again, it was an all expenses paid, I think $1,000 honorarium paid by Arizona State, and they were partnered with Intel on this. So 2 gigs I got from that. And of course, there were all sorts of other things that happened as a result to associate me with this topic that had long-term benefits. So if you want to attract more speaking engagements, you're going to have to first lay a nice foundation for success. I think some of the bare minimum things that you're going to want to do are create a speaking page on your website. And I like a devoted page. It's not something you put in a footnote. It's not something you kind of off the cuff mention in a bio. You want like a very distinctive page in the navigation that shows that you speak. I would consider crafting a speaking kit. So this is an overview of the sorts of sessions you can do, the sorts of terms and conditions that you set out for conferences, like under what conditions you'll speak or not speak, if you have a minimum rate, that sort of thing. And if you're curious about what a speaking kit looks like, you can find it at my website and download it. It's available for anyone to look at. It really, really helps to have a YouTube video or a clip or a reel, something of you speaking, so conferences can get a sense of your style, your presentation, your value. If that's not possible, maybe you're just now in the beginning stages of trying to get your speaking career off the ground, and it's COVID, it's really hard to get a video of yourself speaking in front of an audience. You can try doing a decent book video. So this is where you create, like, I don't want to say trailer because I don't really mean trailer, but a 1 to 2 minute video that demonstrates your book and what you could talk about and the themes, discussion points. There's a very specific author who's done a great course on book videos. I'm trying to remember her name, Amy Stewart. If you look at Amy Stewart, she writes both novels and nonfiction. She has a really strong track record of speaking to both book clubs and other organizations. If you go to her YouTube channel, you'll find her book videos there, and she provides a really nice model to follow. And then finally, if speaking to you means speaking to book clubs, definitely mention book club visits in all of your materials. You want to mention it in the book, you want to mention it on your website, you might have a devoted tab to book clubs, mention it on bookmarks, business cards, everywhere, so that the word can spread that you're open to these types of visits. Now, again, I want to emphasize that I've been pretty fortunate in my career in that because I started with Writer's Digest, an established brand that vouched for me and my credibility, I didn't really have to go pitching myself to conferences. They were coming to Writer's Digest looking for speakers. And now my visibility is such that I still get a pretty consistent stream of requests of people who want me to come and speak. And so I don't have to go hawking my wares. It will likely be different for you in the early stages. You may have to reach out to conferences. Most events are going to be planning out a year in advance, if not more. And again, I'm talking normal times. It's really hard to speak to COVID because everyone's doing things a little differently. But on average, the big worthwhile events are planning out at least a year, if not longer. And the professional events, the ones that have been going on, for more than a decade, typically have a pitch or proposal process, and you can find that process or even the pitch form right on the site, or you could contact the conference team and ask what's your process for speakers who want to pitch themselves. Before you pitch a session or pitch yourself, you do want to study prior event schedules and programming, get a sense of who does appear there, what are they emphasizing. Obviously, you need to have a strong grasp on the audience and how you bring value or benefit to that audience. And then if you do have marketing and promotional channels, mention them when you make your pitch. So for instance, if you have the ability to help drive a little bit of registration for this event, you would mention it. Like you could say, well, I have an email newsletter list of 5,000 and I would be promoting your conference to my list. Or if you have a well-trafficked blog or podcast, you can mention that as a carrot. Actually, I just realized I'm not playing this in exactly the way that I want. Let's do this. There we go. So I mentioned that I had this moment of reckoning in where I had been speaking for free. And then around 2010, 2011, I had to switch to charging. And it was really hard. I think this is one of the toughest challenges that anyone faces, is deciding what's free, what's paid, how much you're going to charge, and then knowing how far you can push it. So initially, my stance was, you're going to have to cover, the event has to cover my expenses and they have to pay me something. Like they can't just cover my expenses. Then, after I did that for a while, like maybe a year or two, I said, well, you're going to have to cover my expenses and you're going to have to pay me a decent hourly rate. So if I expected to present for 3 hours or 5 hours, I would think, okay, if I were working at an hourly rate, what would I expect to earn? 150 an hour, 100 an hour? And so then you can do the calculations. At this stage, I'm at number 3 now, which is you have to cover my expenses and you have to pay me for the value I add to your event. So every speaker has some sort of value that they're contributing that's going to help with registrations, that's going to help the conference be attractive to the community and be valuable to the community. So hopefully you're able to gauge what your value might be, but you also have to keep in mind, of course, the context of the event and who's sponsoring it and what the turnout will be and how much they're charging for registration. This doesn't mean that nonprofit events should get away with not paying their speakers. That's not what I mean at all. But you do have to be reasonable. Not every event is going to have the same budget or you're going to have varying considerations for each and every event. That said, at this point, if someone is offering me a $50 speaking fee to fly out to an event in California when I'm in Virginia, that's just not going to fly. It's not worth my time, and it doesn't recognize the value that I'm offering. So I do still speak for free, or sometimes next to nothing. Like I said, there's many variables. And you'll want to consider the same variables or what things are important to you in considering a speaking engagement. So one of the biggest factors for me is, are there professional networking benefits? So am I going to meet other people there who could be really helpful for me to meet in person, that could become a resource in the future? I do a lot of writing and reporting on the industry, so meeting industry people like agents and editors is really high on my list of things to get out of a conference. Is the event going to meaningfully extend or build my platform? So I might be willing to take a very low or zero speaking fee if I'm at a very high profile event that's reaching thousands of people. Am I going to learn something from the event, or will I report on it through my blog or through my newsletter? That plays a role. If I know the organization or have a long-standing connection to the event, that of course is going to make me more friendly and likely to find a way to accept, even if it's at a lower rate than I might ordinarily accept. And I also think about if it's an interesting travel or vacation possibility. So right now you're seeing a photo of me with the Alaska Writers group. They have an annual conference in Anchorage. I had not been to Alaska before, or actually I might have been on like kind of the outskirts of Alaska, but I hadn't been to Anchorage specifically. And so I was very interested in just going on that trip and going just learning more about writers in that part of the country. It's different. It sounds fun. I think it was enriching. They weren't paying me that much, but I also just got a lot out of it in terms of the culture and just the fun factor. So you're allowed to consider things like that. Now, when I'm likely to charge the most, if I am going somewhere to speak and I am the only speaker, that's when I'm typically going to be charging the most, since I am the draw. Further, if I'm going somewhere uninteresting, I'm more likely to charge a high rate, just because there's only one reason I'm going. There's no one else there except the attendees. There's no professional networking. It's just I'm there to teach. So I'm likely to charge more. If there's a separate registration fee at a larger event, being paid to attend my classes specifically, I might charge more. I might suggest a revenue share. If it's a very travel intensive trip, that's where I tend to raise the rates. So if I have to spend a day in transit, that's a day of lost work. It also increases the possibility that I'm going to be stranded, or, there's going to be more stress. So that costs more. And if I simply have to more intensively prepare for an event, I'm more likely to charge a higher rate. So some things I've learned in the 20 years of speaking at events, I've boiled it down to the really top concerns, which I think some of them are you would guess. So you, of course, want clarity in writing about what expenses the event is covering and what they're paying you. And if it's just an email, that's okay. I don't think you have to have a formal contract. It's going to depend on the situation. It's best if there is a contract, and you can certainly prepare one. There are really simple boilerplate speaking contracts out there you can find just by Googling. One of the lessons I learned when I was still in an informal negotiation with the conference, I agreed to speak for a very specific fee. And then I didn't find out until I was planning my travel later that they were only willing to cover one hotel night, even though I was traveling from Virginia all the way out to the West Coast. And that was almost a deal breaker for me. I was like, if you're only covering one hotel night, like that, I can't turn around a trip that quickly. And plus, I want to stay for the whole conference. I don't just want to dive in for my talk and then depart. I want to get some value out of the event myself. So that was an awkward situation. Always understand what technology is available to you or the nature of the venue itself. A lot of conferences are held in hotels, so there's a lot of predictability associated with that. If it's not in a hotel, you should probably be asking a lot of questions about the services involved, and what sort of support you might have or could have on hand for your presentation, especially from an AV perspective. And I've learned the hard way that you should always insist on a tech check in foreign countries. You might not be up against that sort of unusual scenario anytime soon, but if you are, just know that nothing tends to go to plan when you're working outside of the US. And then before you ever book travel, and some conferences will book your travel for you to avoid this problem, but if you're booking your own travel, air, train, whatever, just make sure to confirm the conference schedule before you nail down those tickets. It's happened more than once where I booked a flight not realizing that they had scheduled me at a particular day and time that was going to make it really hard for me to get in or to get out in a way that would be stress-free, because you don't want to be too tightly hemmed in. I see in the chat that someone asked me to repeat the name of the author who does the really good book videos, and that author is Amy Stewart, Stewart. So when the conference makes an initial suggestion to you about what they offer, what they want from you, it's almost always up for negotiation. So you shouldn't be afraid to ask for what you want or to push back against requests that you think are going to interfere with your effectiveness. So for example, there are some conferences that are still really eager for you to always have a paper handout, like as a value add for your session. And that's something I stopped doing a long time ago. I think it's pretty wasteful. I still offer handouts, but they're all digital. I always have to have AV in the room, meaning I need the ability to show a slide presentation. I always have to have a microphone, and this is for the benefit, not just for you, but also for the people in the room, especially anyone who's hard of hearing, or it's just for accessibility reasons, you always want a microphone. I refuse to take red-eye flights. I just have to draw the line there. I've had too many bad experiences with those. My husband and business partner often travels with me, so however the conference is structured or however they're putting me up, it needs to be compatible with that fact, which leads me to the last point here, which is I don't do room sharing, which some conferences do. They will put you in dorm-like accommodations, and I'm just too old for that at this point. As far as the money, you're going to get exactly what you ask for. So I know the money discussion makes people uncomfortable, but there are ways to make it non-confrontational, to make it conversational. You can simply start by asking, well, can you do better? Or if they've quoted you something that's you feel is really much too low, you can say, well, for what you're asking me to do, for that amount of work, for that amount of travel, for that time commitment, I need at least X dollars. And so that gives the opportunity for the event to come back and say, well, would you do something less, or would you do this other thing instead? You could always offer to prevent virtually instead, especially right now. That's a big positive alternative. You could counter offer like, well, I can't do, it's similar to the bullet point for that level of commitment. I need at least X. You could say, well, if you can pay me $500, would you consider just this one thing that you're happy to do for that rate? One way to turn down opportunities in a kind way is to say, I'm sorry, but I have a rule that, and you tell them what your rule is. Like, I never speak for less than $1,000 on a weekend, or you don't want to make just rules. You don't want to make up rules out of thin air. You want to be honest. But this is a really nice trick for those instances where maybe you are actually in the process of figuring out what your rules are and what your limitations are. Another good line is you can say, well, I've already reached my limit of free speaking engagements this year. And you can tell people, well, come back to me next year. This isn't something I can do right now. Come back to me later. And that allows you to postpone any decision, especially if you're feeling wobbly about it. You're not really sure. I think a good rule of thumb for if you're struggling with whether or not to accept an opportunity or move forward with it, even if you've solicited it, is would you be excited to do this if it were this weekend? So I try not to agree to any event where I wouldn't be very happy to do it immediately. The more I think, well, maybe in 6 months I'll be happy to do it, that to me says you probably shouldn't accept. Victoria asks if I've seen any indication that event organizers use the virtual format as an excuse to not pay speakers or to pay them less. Absolutely. So part of this is unavoidable because events usually have to charge less for a virtual event than an in-person event. Now, there are lots of changing standards around this. But the fact is, if the event organizer has to charge less, that usually means they have to pay the speakers less. I don't think it's an excuse to pay nothing. So I wouldn't accept that. But there was an event, for instance, that I had agreed to speak at in October, and they went all virtual. And our negotiation had covered an in-person event, and I think they were going to pay me $3,000 for everything I had agreed to. So we had to basically renegotiate what that would look like in a virtual environment. And we also kind of renegotiated what my responsibilities would be. So given the fact that I wasn't going to have the travel or the time out of the office, and I had a reduced commitment, we then agreed to $1,000 for the new level of virtual presentation I was going to give. And I think that worked out fine. I didn't feel like I was being cheated. In fact, it may have in the end been better because the travel time and all that time away from home, I think it really takes a toll. It takes a toll on your productivity, and there are costs associated with that. So speakers too benefit from the virtual presentations and in the saving of time, but you're still providing value, so that value ought to be recognized. Once you have an agreement with a conference, you have to be careful about some of the extra requests that may filter in after you've already negotiated what you're going to do and what they're going to pay. And they're not trying, conferences are almost never trying to get away with anything. Rather, it's just exuberance, excitement. They're getting ideas from staffers or from attendees. And so they're just trying to create the best event possible. But it's really common, as the event comes closer, there will be these ideas and you'll be asked, oh, well, would you do this extra panel, or would you take one-on-one meetings? Would you be part of this lunch or extra session? Will you attend these receptions? Will you do this? Will you do that? And, of course, every situation is different. They may be paying you so much that you're like, sure, what else do I have to do on Friday evening? Of course, I'll come to your reception. Or it might even, what they're asking you to do, you would assume that you were going to do that anyway. So, it depends, but just don't be afraid to say, that, what we agreed to was this. I can't really do that without asking for more. Do you have it in your budget to pay me more? One of the best ways to get more speaking engagements is to do a great job at existing ones and to create that word of mouth. So if you have a really great presentation at a conference, the attendees are going to walk away from that and they're going to tell other people, they're going to tell other events, other organizers. That's where a lot of my opportunities have come from over the years, is someone heard a presentation at a conference that I gave, and now they want me to come to their event, or they suggest it to the membership of this other organization. So with that in mind, that success begets more success, you need to make sure that you're agreeing to things you can carry out well. I think it's fine to stretch and challenge yourself at an event, but being stressed and anxious, not so much. So make sure you're agreeing to things that will show your best side. Don't be too people pleasing and with your negotiations with the conference organizers if you think that you're going to end up doing a poor job. Similarly, you as a presenter, you need to clear away other work responsibilities when you're at an event, especially if it's a high stakes event where you feel like a lot's riding on doing a good job, so that you can have that focus and the headspace to do your best work. You want to beat expectations if you can, deliver more value than expected. And that almost always means being present at the event. So not showing up just for your session, but attending other people's sessions, attending the communal meals, going to the receptions, even if they're not required, and getting a really good sense of the crowd that you're speaking to. So this, if you're able to do this prior to your workshops or to your talk, this will only make you better at delivering a successful presentation, because you'll have a better handle on the room and what people care about. So try not to sequester yourself in a hotel room, and be out in the conference venue, engaging with other people as much as you can. Okay, so that takes us to 3:30, and I am going to stop the share for the moment and then open it up to questions that you might have. So I'm just going to check the chat and the Q&A, and feel free to add anything that's on your mind, anything you hoped I would talk about, but maybe I didn't. You can just put those into the Q&A. I see that an anonymous attendee has asked, how do I get over stage terror? When I first started speaking in the early 2000s, there was a lot of nerves and anxiety around speaking, and I consider myself an introvert. I was even afraid sometimes to raise my hand in class in college and speak up. So, it was significant for me to overcome that in the beginning. And the way that I did it was simply by practice. I don't think it gets easier really by practicing alone, or, by meditating or reading guides to public speaking or all of the many things I imagine you could do to try and feel prepared, I think you'd get better at it and you avoid the terror simply by doing more of it. All that said, I think it does help if nerves are really, really, big barrier for you. If you can, do you have a sympathetic person at home? Do you have a friend, a family member, a loved one, someone who is willing to listen to your presentation, and not critique you, but just give you the opportunity, that feeling of speaking in front of someone else for an uninterrupted period of 30 minutes or 60 minutes or however long you intend to speak or teach? A lot of my nervousness was overcome because I started university teaching, and I just every single day of every single week, practically, I had to get up in front of a classroom and talk. So again, I just think being forced into those situations, even if it's low stakes, just really helps you get more comfortable and understand what you need to perform well. Practice, of course, in private helps, but even I think out in the field practice is just as important. I know Toastmasters is often held up as one of the resources you can go to practice public speaking. I've never done that myself, but other people swear by it, so I would suggest that as well. Susan says, please speak more about fees, especially word choices on how to ask for more. So why don't I bring up that slide again, just so we can digest it even more fully. Here we go. So I think the number one thing to remember is that your offer to speak is not likely, if ever, to be rescinded because you asked for more money. So you really just have to set it up as every single time you're going to ask for more, and it's okay. I prefer to do this over email in writing and not over the phone. I think it's harder to do on the phone. So let's assume email, that you're able to do it in writing. I think as soon as they quote you something, and they're almost always going to be the first ones to put a number out there in my experience, you can say, well, can you do better? I think that's a really easy question to ask. And I don't think it's a confrontational question. Then they will try to come up with something better if they can. And then if you don't like what they come up with and you don't feel you can speak at that level, then I would make a counter offer. I would say, I really need X to fit this onto my schedule, or I really need X given the other priorities I have going on at that time. You could say, I might have time for this if you were able to pay me X to prioritize it above other, things on my plate. So there are lots of ways to, like, we all have competing demands on our time, competing priorities, and money talks. So if people are willing to pay you more to prioritize their event on your schedule, you can make that pretty clear. I don't think you're going to be seen as mercenary. You're just, they're running a business. The conference is a business, a small business, and so are you. So I can guarantee that, they're having the money conversation with almost all of their speakers. Now, if they have a really tight budget and they really can't negotiate, they usually tell you that up front. They'll say our budget's really tight and we're really sorry we can't offer you much, but we can offer you X. Sometimes conferences drop lots of hints about their monetary limitations for paying speakers. And if that's the case, then you can, rather than pushing them to do something they're just not capable of, you can try and negotiate as far as what you're willing to do for what they're willing to pay. And maybe that's a virtual presentation or just a reduced commitment to the event. So I hope that helps. If you have to do this on the phone, which would not be my first choice, I think, you can use the same language and the same questions, but always be prepared to whip out the phrase, I'm going to need to think about that, or let me get back to you, or I need to check my calendar, or there's another event I'm considering at that time. I need to see if it conflicts with yours, so you're trying to leave as many doors open as possible so that you can back out if the money is really just not there for you. JD asks, are your speaking agreements memorialized in writing, and do you forfeit copyright to your material? So almost all of the agreements are at least informally agreed to in email. So they are in writing in email. There may or may not be a formal contract that's signed. I would say maybe 50 to 75% of conferences will send me a formal contract. I don't have a big preference, but if you're the type of person who really likes formality in this area, and I can't blame you if you do, I'm just pretty relaxed myself, then you should put together a really like a 2-page speakers agreement. You can find templates online and put your understanding of everything into this boilerplate agreement. Just fill in the blanks about the dates and what your commitments are and what they're going to pay you and so on. And then ask them to sign it. It'll be good for them if they're not accustomed to putting things in writing to see clearly what each side is agreeing to. And then that agreement, if it is in writing, like the conferences that are pretty serious and professional, they'll send you their own contract that typically has a clause in there governing if they can resell a recording of your presentation. So some conferences will record audio or video. They might even stream it, given COVID at this point. So you have to negotiate that as well. Typically, you're not forfeiting copyright. You retain the copyright, but you're granting rights for them to reuse and sometimes even profit off the presentation. And I don't agree to those things. And I think you generally will have, I think, good luck with pushing back against anything that's about profiting off your presentation after the fact, because it's just not, I don't think it's widely accepted that conferences get to do that. I do think it's okay, especially given where we're at now with COVID. If a conference wants to record your presentation and make it available to people who registered for the conference for a limited time, that could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, maybe even a year, if that makes sense. But it's only available to people who registered for the event, and it's behind a paywall. I think those sorts of things are fine. Like it's a value add that you're giving. But I don't think it's really that great if you say, oh yeah, you can sell a recording of my presentation indefinitely, and you're going to keep earning dollars off my presentation. That's not cool. Someone anonymous is asking, you might get requests that don't specify if they're planning to pay you. And I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment. So it says, you might get requests that don't specify if they're planning to pay you. And do you have budget for speakers is usually a little easier to ask rather than, are you going to pay me? So I think that was an answer to someone else's question. So yeah, you can word these things in friendly ways. So rather than being confrontational, are you going to pay me or not? You can say, do you have a budget for speakers? I'm a very direct person over email, and I have come right out and said, do you pay? I mean, I just cut right to the chase. And if they're not speaking to the money up front in their initial approach, that's definitely the first question they're getting from people they're contacting. So do not feel guilty or self-conscious about asking, because it is the question, and they are trying to make it a little harder for you by not bringing it up themselves. Victoria asks what equipment I recommend for professional virtual presentations. I would recommend at minimum a USB microphone. So this is an external microphone that plugs into your computer using a USB cable. Blue Yeti microphone works great. It costs about $100. It's pretty affordable, I think, for most people. The webcam that's built into your computer, like your desktop or your laptop, should work fine. I don't think you need a special webcam unless you happen to have a really old computer that doesn't have a webcam, but I hope that's not the case. So those are the two critical pieces. And then I think it helps to have headphones like I do, just to ensure that there isn't any audio interference. Ivy asks if I have an established way to prepare slides for events. I do. I have a conference presentation file. In fact, why don't I? That might be interesting to show folks. I'm going to stop the slide share here for a second. And I'm going to show you my conference presentation folder. So let me share that. Okay, so here's my conference presentation folder, and you'll see that I've got everything labeled by the year that I prepared the slide presentation. It's very deliberate. And then you'll see the time lengths appended. So, I give so many presentations on similar topics like author platform, email newsletters, book marketing. I tend to, there's like 6 core topics that every conference wants a presentation on, but they want them at different lengths, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, 6 hours. So I always label the time. That's important for me. And then you'll see that going down. I've got a lot for 2020. You might say, wow, why so many in 2020? Well, actually, speaking has increased. I'm doing more virtual presentations. I'm doing more webinars. So 2020 has been a bumper year for preparing these sorts of things. I'm a Mac user, so I use Keynote to prepare my slides. I use the Keynote templates. I stick to the same template every time because that makes it easier for me to grab slides from other presentations and mix and match some things. So that way I'm not redesigning every single time I'm giving a presentation. It just cuts down on my prep. Every once in a while, I will break out like a totally new template and do something that's very unique, but there has to be a good reason for it. Like it's a very special group and a very particular audience where I don't expect I'm going to present to them again. And I would never want to switch out the slides with some other presentation. When you're preparing visuals for a conference, you'll want to know if you can know, is it okay if you use your own laptop or devices to present? Do they mandate that you use their computer? In that case, you often have to send the presentation in advance, or you have to bring it on a thumb drive. If you do have to use someone else's computer, that may mess up your slide presentation if they don't have the right fonts or the right software. So I always insist on using my own machine to present so that I can cut out some of those unexpected tech glitches. The other thing it helps to know is if the presentation equipment in the room supports widescreen slides. So for this presentation, I was presenting in a 16:9 format. So that's like widescreen movie style format. But some of my presentations are 4:3, which is the more kind of traditional square style slide. Neither is necessarily better, but we are moving more towards 16:9 style, moving away from 4:3. But you just have to know the particulars of the presentation, of the venue you're presenting at and which formats they support. They might support both, or they might have a 4:3. 4:3 tends to keep you out of trouble, but ask the conference organizers if you're not sure. Okay. Christy asks if Toastmasters is the only speaking organization to learn and practice. I don't know. I just know that they're the most commonly referenced because that's their purpose. I imagine that there are many sorts of organizations, social clubs, et cetera, where you might be able to practice your speaking skills. But Toastmasters is the one that's focused on that in particular. Kate asks if I bring any of my own AV equipment to the venues. So as I mentioned earlier, I do bring my own laptop. I bring several dongles. So those are the adapters that connect your laptop to the presentation equipment. So like the slide projector or I'm blanking on the name of the machine, like the projector, basically. Some conferences have a podium with all of that equipment built in, and so you can hook up your laptop right on the podium itself. Other times you have to take your laptop over to like a rolling cart where the projector is. So for that reason, I also bring my own remote control. So it's a USB remote control. So you plug one half of it into your laptop, and then you have the other half in your hand so that you can control the presentation without having to be next to your computer. It allows you to walk and talk. So if you are going to use your own equipment at a conference, make sure that you've got all of the potential dongles that you might need, like VGA, HDMI, etc., and also a remote control to power the presentation. Some people are able to use their cell phones for that. So like Apple has a remote control app that you could use, but I like having the hardware in my hand. I don't like holding the phone. Anita asks, please speak about what kinds of things you say during your presentation at an event. How do you start? If I've been given an introduction, with the basic facts about who I am, which most people already know anyway, I just start with the session itself. I try to avoid any small talk at the beginning. I know there's some presenters who really like warming up the room first and doing an icebreaker. But for my purposes, for most conferences I attend, time is pretty short. Those sorts of warm-up exercises really slow things down, and most people are looking for really, hardcore takeaways. Like they're coming to learn about how to write a query, and they don't want to be chatting with their partner for 10 minutes about the struggles of query letter writing. For longer format sessions where I'm speaking maybe for 3 hours, for even 6 hours, like a master class, then I'll have much more of that sort of engagement at different points of the class. I don't usually put it up front. I like to lay the groundwork first and establish what we're going to be doing in the class, how we're going to move through the material, give people an overview of how we're going to tackle the topic so that they understand, just what to expect, when to expect it. So that's how I proceed. I spend almost zero time talking about who I am, where I come from, unless I think it's particularly relevant to the advice I'm about to share. JD asks if I have a policy of not speaking if a colleague is being paid more for the same gig. I don't know that I would have any insight into what someone else is being paid unless that person told me. So it seems unlikely. I never have that level of insight into the payments. It's usually kept quiet. Now, there is greater movement towards speakers asking organizers, what's the representation at your event? Are underrepresented groups in your speaker lineup? And insisting that they have appropriate representation before you agree to speak. But I haven't seen people bow out strictly on the basis of payment. Anita's asking me to confirm that microphone I recommended. It was the Blue Yeti, and that's spelled Y-E-T-I, Blue Yeti. Kathy asks if I memorize, and do I have good techniques for memorizing a speech or presentation? It is super rare for me to memorize a presentation. On occasion, for a really important keynote talk, I will practice it several times. I will practice the transitions in between the slides. I will write notes about the key points I want to make, and I will get really close to something that might be memorization, but I don't like literally memorize it word for word. I think a good way to help yourself memorize a presentation, whether it's word for word or not, is if you have slides, those can act as memory triggers for what you want to say. Not that you would be writing what you want to say on the slide, but you have a visual there, or you have the first few words of the sentence that get you talking into the next point or giving you the next anecdote or story. There's also in both PowerPoint and Keynote, again, assuming you have a slide presentation, they have a speaker or presentation notes feature where if the conference has set things up properly, you can see your presentation notes, but the audience can't see the notes. They only see the slide. So that's also a way to have comments really specifically, right there on the screen, that you can read from in case you forget what you want to say. So those are the tricks that I use. Susan is commenting that she strongly suggests taking some sort of a class in public speaking because of the rigorous training it provides. If you can find one, that sounds like a good idea to me. I don't know. There must have been a public speaking class at my college, but it would have never occurred to me to take that class. So I've done okay without it, but I certainly had many years there where I probably wasn't the best speaker. Christy says, in a public speaking class in college, the teacher spoke to the universal fear of public speaking as number one, even more feared than going to the dentist or having a heart attack. So she's surprised that Toastmasters is the only common organization that addresses overcoming this fear. Maybe there's a new frontier to market and serve communities. It might be, if it's actually true that Toastmasters is kind of the only organization that comes to mind for this, or it's the only one doing work in this area. I know there is a public speakers professional organization, but which I don't know that much about. I just know that it exists. But my impression is that it's for people who have already arrived. I don't know if it's for people who are still kind of in the emerging stages of learning how to do it well. But that said, I would look for that organization and see if they provide any sort of beginner level meetings or chapters or training or public speaking schools, something that might be useful to you. I have an anonymous attendee asking if I have advice on starting out as a speaker or looking for gigs if you don't yet have a niche expertise or a strong position. I think I'll emphasize what I said really early in the hour, which is it really helps to be producing work in some way, to be, even if you don't have a niche, to be consistently visible in what you're publishing. And often publishing a book, unless it's from a traditional publisher, that might not get the momentum going strongly enough. So you want to look at what can you do more rapidly. What sort of issues can you become known for or associated with? Because that's almost always what leads to speaking engagements or speaking invites, that you have become associated with a topic that people want to learn about or know about. So I would really push you to think more about what is that for you, especially if you don't have a specific book or a specific body of work that's taking shape that would make you visible. It's really hard to get speaking engagements for yourself in general. Like, it has to be associated with something that represents a need or a benefit or a value to a specific community. Ivy suggests trying improv classes. That's a wonderful suggestion. Improv terrifies me. And I so admire the people who can do it. But I think that's an inspired suggestion. Susan mentions there are a zillion coaches for public speaking out there. That's true. I'll mention one person I know who's a colleague and a friend, Gigi Rosenberg in Portland, Oregon, does public speaking coaching. I don't know if she does it just for people in Portland or if she does it for anyone virtually, but she's someone I would look up and see if she does virtual consultations. I think she's very experienced. She also understands creatives really well, so she tends to coach artists, writers, other creative professionals. So if you're a writer or author, I think you would find her insights particularly useful. JD asks, I've had many speaking gigs as an attorney, but I'd like more gigs as a fiction writer. Do I have suggestions? Should he start a YouTube channel or she? I want to point you to Amy Stewart. So Amy Stewart, if you look at her YouTube channel, I'm not saying you should start a YouTube channel, but if you look at her YouTube channel, you're going to see how a fiction writer is able to produce some media that helps events, that attracts events and speaking engagements. So you have a model to follow there in how it can get done. I think often it starts out with book clubs and then it expands from there to places like libraries and literacy centers, community sorts of events, book festivals. That's actually another area that can be really fruitful for novelists, although usually not well paying if they pay at all. So, but there are countless book festivals that are always looking for authors to populate panels, although they tend to favor those authors who have just had a book come out. So if your novel is, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, it might be a bit tougher to get those festival gigs. All right. I think that covers all the questions, and we're now at the top of the hour at 4 o'clock. I'll just go back to my slide presentation here briefly to tell you what's coming up later. Here we go. Okay, so I just wanted to mention my next business sermon is going to be on December the 13th, no, 14th, or no, it is the 13th, sorry. So Sunday, December 13th. And I'm going to be talking about measurement and analytics. So all of the number crunching that you can do to measure your success with online marketing. So if you go to my Sunday business sermons page at my website, you can sign up for that. It's free, of course, as all of the other sermons are. And I'm also doing some paid online courses throughout December. The first one's going to be on author platform. And then the second one is going to be on social media. And in between those two classes, there will also be one by Allison Williams, who's going to be talking about second drafts. So you can find out more about those classes at my website. So thank you so much for coming today. I hope you've had a relaxing holiday weekend, and I look forward to seeing you at another sermon soon. Bye-bye.